Live across all the other platforms when StreamYard decides to catch up. There we go. Okay, we are now live. That's fantastic. Good evening. It's Wednesday evening here in the UK. It is 7:30 p.m. and it's time for Straight Talking. So every Wednesday evening, I bring in a fantastic guest from around the globe with their own interesting story to share with all of you guys. And you can watch them all back on the YouTube channel, of course, as well. So this evening is a very special guest, is a man who has his own challenges, has been through his own challenges, but he's also a big inspiration to me. He's been a huge inspiration to me over the last 10 years at least. His name's Lewis Senior. He's the CEO and co-founder of a company called Equilibria. Equilibria is a system, and the e-color system is a process that I went through to learn more about myself and my role and how I could work and show up better in the world. Lewis is going to give us loads more information on this tonight. So hello to everyone on Instagram over there. Hello to everyone on all the other platforms over there. I'm going to bring Lewis in now, and I'm going to let Lewis obviously introduce himself, of course, as well. So let's bring him in. Hello, Lewis.
Hi, thank you for having me.
That's all right. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you. I'm actually talking from Spain.
Okay, lovely. You know, it's a little bit warmer there than it is here, I'm sure. But you know, you're having your own challenges over there, I guess, with COVID, etc. It's changed everything, hasn't it, everywhere?
It really has. And it's not getting any better either. In fact, they're talking about completely shutting everything down for Christmas, which is going to be a nightmare for people.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we have to just look for a brighter 2021, don't we? But yeah, it's challenging for the moment, for sure. So let's get into it, Lewis. Introduce yourself first and foremost to everyone who's watching. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Okay, thank you. Well, my name is Lewis Senior. As Mark said, I have the privilege of being the CEO of an organization called Equilibria, which we founded in 2004. We predominantly look around understanding people's personality diversity and all of the aspects that come from that. Had a background in oil and gas for nearly 30 years before we started Equilibria, and have had some very interesting moments along the way. I'm actually from Leeds, so I think there's probably a couple of people watching from there. Used to support Leeds United back in the day, Mark. And
I'll give you.
Over 40 years ago, I met my wife actually in Spain. We got married soon after that, and been in Spain ever since. When I'm not working, well, up until COVID, and I'm now working.
And of course, yeah, and of course, you've worked worldwide as well. Of course, you know, so you've been all over. So we're going to cover all of that, of course. But as you well know, my background is a bit of music and DJing. You know, I've got a bit of that behind me. So why don't you tell us about your favourite music to get us going?
Well, you know, it's interesting knowing you know, because of your history with Life Remix. I got to thinking about when did music really come into my life, and there's a couple of moments which I thought might be worth understanding. Being from Leeds, back in the day in the 70s, Leeds University had an incredible union, and every week there was The Who, it was the Stones, it was all of the groups that, you know, today people would remember as the top group. So that was certainly the start of it. And then I was talking to my wife about it the other day, 13th of July, 1985. Do you remember what that day was?
Tell me.
Live Aid.
Oh, of course.
And my wife was actually about 9 months and a week pregnant with Laura, my daughter. And we sat watching Live Aid that day. And two groups really got my attention. One was Simple Minds and the other one was Queen. Fast forward to about 9 months ago, and Laura, my daughter, and I actually went to see Queen and Adam Lambert in Houston. And I can tell you, for 2 hours and 20 minutes, we stood and we cried. It was the most remarkable experience. So very, very much kind of come the full circle, and always looking, I really enjoy watching music today.
Music is the sound of emotions, Lewis.
Very much so.
Yeah, it's the sound of emotions and memories, and yeah, it has real beautiful connotations in that as well. I mean, I watched Bohemian Rhapsody recently. I don't know if you've seen that film, and Rocket Man. Yeah, John, what great movies they are.
Very, very good. And I have to say, you know, Adam Lambert did a phenomenal. I love what he actually did. If you get the chance, I think Brian May actually had a heart attack recently, but if there is an opportunity to go and see Queen with Adam Lambert, I would highly recommend it. And what I really like what he does very early on in the show, he says, look, I am not Freddie Mercury. He said, I am a queen, but I'm not Freddie Mercury. But I love to sing his songs. And that's what he does. And he does a beautiful job of it, actually. Really
amazing.
Good.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, what an act to try and follow. But yeah, we will keep an eye out for that. When we can have live events, or when we can go to live events again, Lewis, I'll keep an eye out for that. So let's talk about Equilibria and of course the E-Colors product. But before we get to that, because there's a story behind it, isn't there? I've read your book At the End of the Day with Laura, co-written with Laura. Your book made it okay for me to tell my story with Life Remixed. So I absolutely, honor and thank you for writing that book, 20 years ago, whenever it was, because it's I've read it and it made it okay for me to do what I'm doing now. So thank you for that. But tell us about it. Everyone needs to hear your story. If they haven't read the book, how did all this come about?
Okay, so I have to back up obviously a little bit. So I worked in oil and gas for about 30 years, and towards the end of my career in oil and gas, I really started to want to understand better how so many people were getting hurt, maimed, and killed for no reason other than their own personality. And I'd been trying to work through that to better understand it, and actually got an opportunity to become the health and safety manager after years of being in operations for what turned out to be the largest drilling contractor in the world. And we had actually got, before we started to merge and acquire companies, we actually had an incredible safety record. In fact, the rigs that I used to run all over the world, they used to call the University of Safety, because we were always trying things to keep people in one piece, regardless of where they were in the world. When we started to go through the mergers and acquisitions, you can imagine bringing people in from different cultures, different ideas, different backgrounds. We actually had 7 fatalities in a very short space of time. And I'll explain a little bit about personality in the E-Colors in a while, but my E-Colors are predominantly yellow-red. So I am quite an emotional person. And I got to a point where I was desperately trying to help people to stay safe when they didn't even seem to be particularly interested in staying safe themselves. And so we got to a point where, as we were going through the mergers, part of my job was with a group of other people was to go around the world and try and help people understand that all of these companies coming under one roof would actually be a good idea, and was literally doing major ballrooms and conference rooms during the day with hundreds of people going through that process, and at night still being the health and safety manager. I used to smoke like a chimney, used to eat any Toblerone bars that were in the fridge in the hotel, and drink black coffee that was coming out of my ears. And all of those things would stimulate an already stimulated mind. And we were actually doing a training session in Pau one day in France, in a hotel, and it all caught up with me. So, Mark, this is the kind of defining moment for me, if you like. I was laying in the bath. I don't know if you or your listeners have ever read a book called The Celestine Prophecy, but what happened to me is described absolutely perfectly in that book. I was lying in the bath. All of a sudden, I started to feel my heart pounding. I mean, really pounding. And all of a sudden, this white light started to come towards me, which again, it's in the book. So as the white light's coming towards me, all of a sudden, I'm in a pram in the back of my garden about 2.5 years old. And then this happened because that happened, and this happened because that happened, and this. And all of a sudden I thought, oh my God, I'm going to die. So I jumped out the bath, ran down the corridor naked, not a pretty sight, I can tell you, in the Novotel in Pau, and ran into one of the guys who worked for our company and actually was on a well control course, and his eyes were about that big. And I just crashed down on the floor. And while I was laying on the floor, I was fighting for breath. I mean, literally, it was like every breath felt like it was going to be my last breath. And this voice came into my head and said, you can have another breath if you make a promise. So I promised to spend more time with the family, because my life in oil and gas had been 28 days offshore, 28 days at home. And then when we started doing all of these sessions for bringing the companies together, I was never at home. And I started to fight for breath again. And the voice came again and said, you can have another breath if you make another promise. So I thought to myself, I promise never to have an argument again. And actually, the reality is, my wife, as you'll learn a little bit about the equal, is what we call predominantly blue-green. We've never had an argument in 40 years. She can argue on her own. She doesn't need me involved at all. I just sit there watching a tennis match. But I used to argue on behalf of the company when people are telling us this isn't going to work, that's not going to work. And then I started to fight for breath again, and the voice came back to me again and said, you can have another breath if you make another promise. And I promised to become a better listener, because at that time, I was the one doing a lot of the talking on behalf of the company. And every evening, somebody would come along and go, oh, you're a good speaker. Well, the more they told me I was a good speaker, the less listening I used to do. And finally, as I thought, I still need some more breath, the voice said, and you can have as many breaths as you like if you make one more promise. And I said to myself, I'm going to promise to find a way to help people communicate. And about that time, the ambulance arrived, because everybody thought I'd had a heart attack, as did I. And apparently they inject, I don't know what they inject, but normally you get X amount of a syringe. I think they were into 2.5 syringes when they finally knocked me out. And I woke up in a mental hospital in France 2.5 days later, with my wife standing at the end of the bed, who they had flown up from Spain. And for anybody on this podcast who speaks Spanish, she said, levántate, gilipollas, no te pasa nada, which means get up, you idiot. There's nothing wrong with you. You're just exhausted. So after some tests on my brain and everything else, we flew back home to Spain. About that time, because of all the public speaking I'd been doing, I actually had some nodules on my throat. So they decided to remove the nodules about 4 days after I got home. And as they were wheeling me into the theater, the doctor said, now don't forget, when you wake up, you cannot speak for 10 days. And my wife looked behind him and said, and you can never smoke again. I mean, that's great news for you, for somebody like me, right? So I woke up, and literally for 10 days, this is pre-iPad, pre-iPhone or whatever, I just literally lay here at home in Spain next to the pool with a whiteboard, went, can you please make me a cup of tea or something like that? But it really gave me an opportunity to think through my life, as you can well imagine. And Mark, I know this is where the similarities are, between you and me. And I'm yet to work out, do you really need something drastic before you decide to do something different? Well, during that period, I made my mind up to do something different. And it was quite interesting, because I flew back to Houston with the intention of telling the drilling contractor that I was actually going to be leaving immediately. And the message back in Houston is, oh, Lewis will probably come in with a butterfly net, because, he's gone a little bit off the rails here. So my boss said, look, you don't want to leave right now. What you need to do is start coaching some of our managers around the world. And during that period, you can decide if you like coaching. And his name is Walter Cabuccio. And I have to thank him for that, because for the next 2 years, that's what I did. I went around the world and coached a lot of the managers who were technically very, very strong, but maybe not as strong on the people skills. And when I was just about, well, actually, 4 of us decided to leave the drilling contractor at the same time. And on the 4th of April, 2004, we formed Equilibria. And we came up one afternoon with a vision of realizing potential and a single core value of people first. And I had actually intended to go another 6 months before we actually left the organization. And then that happened in April. And then in June, there was a horrible set of events that happened on one of the rigs in Nigeria. I went out working for the drilling contractor, and halfway through that process, the vice president of actually the company said, Lewis, start Equilibria right now, bring one of your partners down, and we'll keep you working for the first 2 years. We know you're onto something, but you're a little bit further ahead than the rest of us. And that's what we did, and that's what they did. And the rest has been the most remarkable journey, Mark.
I love it. I've got a couple of quick fire questions for you. What age were you when you had the incident in Paris, the kind of the turn of events that led to the collapse, etc.? What age were you then?
2002. It happened in 2002, and I'm going to be 70 next year.
Okay, all right. So around Around 48, 49, 50.
Over 50.
Okay, all right, that's interesting. And at the time, obviously, you were working, as you say, for the drilling company and managing a lot of these rigs. So you used to say you were never at home; you were moving around all over the place.
Yeah.
And that must have taken its toll eventually, of course, as well. I love the fact that you didn't want to be found naked in the bath, so you decided to go for a jog down the hotel corridor. I love that one, and I also love a bit of tough love from your missus. Get up, you idiot!
which is really what I need to hear, because all I'd actually had was just absolute exhaustion, and that's one of the reasons why later on I wanted to write the book with Laura, because I really, and you and I have talked a lot about this, I really hope people don't have to go through something so dramatic before they decide to make a change. And I know obviously that's a lot about you and I have in common, but that is something that really has stuck with me. I really thought the end had come. And Mark, I'll just tell you something that I do a lot of coaching around this today. I honestly believe that when I was laying on the floor, two things occurred to me. People who die with a smile on their face are happy with what they call their life review, which again, this is what they talk about in the book, is you're going to see your life play out just before you die. I just wasn't ready. I did not like the legacy I was leaving, and I really wanted to do some things differently. And that for me was the driver, and that stuck with me every day since, I can tell you.
No, that's really good. I mean, yeah, exhaustion and stress are certainly big players, and you and I have just discussed that as well. Of course, my own issues, certainly I would say 80% stress and 20% diet and other addictions and things I was getting into. I've got a quick wave from David, and also I've got a message from Linda Lever. She says, Lewis, keep on talking, Leeds are winning 5-2. So I thought you might want to know that. Anyway, so the book. So obviously the book, the title at the end of the day, a dramatic story, obviously, and I've read it, as I say, and it certainly helped. It was helped me on my journey, let's put it that way, towards Life Remixed. So how did that come about? And obviously you involved Laura. I mean, Laura would have been quite young at that stage, I guess, for her to actually input into the book. How did that come about, or what were the actions you took?
It's probably, I did them a disservice. I should have said at the beginning. So my wife, Isabel, as I say, we've been married over 40 years. Like I say, Laura was actually born 2 weeks after Live Aid, the 27th of July. And then just three years later, David came along. They both work with us now, which is fantastic. We have a wonderful relationship. But when Laura got into her teens, her and I had absolutely nothing in common. I was away a lot. She had her own issues going through her teens and everything, to a point where we literally weren't talking. And they got to one point, I think, where my wife actually called me. I was in Houston. Her family were over here in Spain, and said, you need to get Laura out of here. Take her to Houston for a week. So I actually brought her over to Houston. We were running a leadership program at the time. And actually what happened was Laura finished off sitting with some people that I had been working with in the past. And they said to her, Laura, have you any idea what your dad did for me, or did for this one or that one? And the reality, she didn't have a clue. So we kind of reset the relationship. And for those of you who have teenage children, I will never forget this. So a few weeks later, she said to me, will you coach me? And I went, Laura, I would love to coach you. I've been trying to help you for years. She said, I don't want your help. I want you to coach me, which I thought was really interesting in how that played out. Anyhow, she came to work with us literally when we started Equilibria. And a few years later, Laura said to me one day, you need to write a book. You have a story to tell. A lot of people can learn from it. Go ahead and write a book. So I told her, look, I don't know how to write a book. And all kudos to you for the way you've done it, because that's not what we did, I'll tell you. And I also told her, you find a ghostwriter, a book coach, whatever you want to call it, and we will write a book. So Laura did a lot of research, found somebody actually in Houston, who I, to this day, owe a lot of thanks, TJ Bietic. And what was pretty cool is we met her in the coffee shop of Barnes & Noble up in the Woodlands in Houston. So Laura and I sitting there with this ghostwriter, and she said, so which shelf is your book going to sit on? Is it a self-help book? Is it what is it? So he started to really think about what that would look like. And then it got really, really interesting. So after she began to understand our story, she said, look, I'd like to offer an idea. And you've read the book, so you know how it flows. She said it should be a chapter by you, Lewis, and a chapter by Laura. And that's how the book is actually laid out. The biggest lesson I got from that, and I can remember it like it was yesterday. We got about halfway through the book. I was actually in Dubai working on some particular leadership project. And TM, the lady who wrote the book for us, called me and she said, Lewis, I need to check some facts with you, because we would give our side to the story on a particular subject. And then obviously she would check it with the other person. And she started to describe an event that Laura talked about when she was 12 years old. And I remember looking down the phone and I said, TJ, I've got to be honest with you. I do not remember this event, much less the details that Laura's talking about. It didn't even register. And I was actually with one of our coaches at that time, a guy called Dave Kane. And when I put the phone down, I said, Dave, I am going to make a further promise right now. In the future, if people are going to have an experience with me, I am going to be intentional about it. So I will remember it later as well as them. And to this day, I mean, if my hashtag is intentional CEO, and I can tell you there's not a single word comes out of my mouth that I haven't thought about before it comes out. I did not used to be like that, but it's led to some really great results.
Yeah, I mean, one of my little learning things was calm down and speed up. And I think when I calmed down and learned to deal with any anxieties I had and cleared away the alcohol and some of the addictions, and then actually came into a place of calmness, my life seems to have got quicker and quicker. And there seems to be more and more amazing results happening because of the calmness. I'm not in that place of kind of like, it's like just be sort of centered and, as you say, intentional, which I love. And yeah, I mean, your purpose, your vision, and your goals. I mean, why don't you talk a bit more? Obviously, I mean, Equilibria is obviously about realizing potential, better communications, at work. I mean, you clearly made these decisions that were vitally important for your survival, even at that point. At the day of your collapse, etc. But what I like about the fact when you're speaking about the rig, from my understanding and understanding your history, that first rig that you went onto, the safety figures improved and the productivity also went up because you got everyone communicating using e-colors, correct?
Yes. Yeah, we had so for those of you who don't know what the e-colors are, we designed a very simple system around personality. And, there's been a recognition that there are 4 basic personality types. That's been around for 2,000 or 3,000 years, starting with the Chinese, where they used to talk earth, wind, fire, and water. We kind of boiled it down to red, yellow, blue, and green, and there's combinations of that. So what we began to see is it's actually quite predictable. The reason that we actually, or my side of it anyhow, why I wanted to start Equilibria, I had gone out to a rig where they'd had a fatality a year before the real disaster they had. I mean, that was obviously a disaster, but even bigger one. And everybody was trying to understand what happened, because the organization I was with at the time had very good procedures. They were well down the road in terms of a safety culture. How did this happen? So I was actually sitting down with the crews one night and was asking them individually, so tell me, what are your strengths? And in those days, we used to call them improvement opportunities, and what motivates you, those kind of questions. And a guy called Kevin Bartow, who I will be eternally grateful to, turned around and said, Lewis, if you're asking these questions, why don't you ask us how we can get hurt? And the moment he asked the question, I knew how many millions of dollars the drilling contractor had spent on trying to keep people safe. We had never asked people how they could get hurt. So I said, okay, who wants to go first? And the guy said to me, well, you know a little bit about my colors, because we've been piddling with the colors, put it that way, already. He said, I am predominantly yellow-blue, just like you, Mark, and I've asked you this question before. And he said, I can get hurt jumping in to help. And the moment he said that, my first thought was my mother, who until very recently at 94 years old would spend 3 nights a week up all night answering suicide calls down in Australia, yellow blue, loves to help. My next thought went to somebody who 2 years earlier had got hurt on one of the other, actually got killed on one of the other rigs, who was a banksman. So, you've got experience in construction. So the banksman is the person that signals the crane. They wear a nice big orange jacket, which says banksman. And in the procedure, it says, if you're the banksman, thou shalt not touch the load. Mm-hmm. So they're on a rig in the North Sea, bad night, very rough, trying to land a basket, long basket, got taglines on either side of the basket, 2 ropes, 2 people holding the ropes. The banksman, who again happened to be predominantly yellow-blue, saw them struggling, overrode the procedure in his head, ran in and tried to help. Got caught between the basket and the Samson post, dead as a doornail. So these thoughts were immediately going through my head. So when it was all over, that was in 2003, I went back into town and I told everybody, we're missing something here. We need to have a look at personality in terms of our safety culture. Yeah, Lewis, we understand what you're doing, but we're a drilling contractor. That was the kind of message. Anyhow, a few months later, they had another fatality. Actually, they had somebody got hurt one night late on the rig. They decided to fly a helicopter out. The person who got hurt, the person who was looking after him, the pilot and the co-pilot all died because the helicopter crashed. So the operator, the oil company, shut the rig down and told the drilling contractor, this rig is not going back to work until you can prove you can work incident-free, which is very hard to do after you've just had something like that. Yeah. So I went out there, like I mentioned before, as an employee of the drilling contractor, and 3.5 weeks later, I came off and we'd started Equilibria. And that's literally when we first started Equilibria, we had one little card with the 12 different combinations of E-colors and how people said it can get hurt. And that right now has been the biggest game changer for many people working in high-risk industries around the world.
Absolutely. I mean, with the work, obviously, when I realized about how I could get hurt on the first time I did the Equilibria E-colors PDI, which you can do yourself, by the way. You can go to equilibria.com and you can discover your E-colors on there. There's a short questionnaire. Takes about 15 minutes to do. It's fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating. But when I realized how I could get hurt by jumping in to help someone else, I was always jumping in, even from a little kid. I'd jump in and help my brother. Like, don't worry, Dan, I'll do that for you. And I'd be there. And when I read that about that's possibly a way that I could get hurt or even killed in a high risk industry, it was like a bit of a game changer for me, because I was like, oh yeah, I do that. And it was almost like, and then we'll talk more, but you go into pause and play. And it's like, for me, it's like I have to pause that part of my, my willingness to sort of jump in and help everybody. It's like, no, pause on that and have a think, even if it's count to 10 or whatever, just think about what you're doing before you jump in. And I've done the PDI 3 or 4 times over the last 10 years. I always came out as yellow blue. Until my last one a few weeks ago when I came out as yellow red, and we'll discuss the reasons behind that shortly, I'm sure. But yeah, so the safety and the productivity, the figures were great for the next year or however long on that rig, right?
Several years, actually, yeah. And right. So actually, and I don't mind sharing it because I think they'd be very proud of it, but the operator was actually Chevron, and they have been a phenomenal leader in this part of in that type of industry, and they have taken us all over the world. So you name it, Thailand, Canada, Kazakhstan, everybody got into the same process. And literally today, I've spent most of today coaching different leaders in Chevron, still using some of those principles from the beginning. But of course, we've come a long way since then. But the understanding of personality and how it relates not only to safety, but then we looked at why don't people stop the job? I mean, this is something that lots of industries struggle with, even in healthcare, which we're working now. If you've got a nurse who may be a little bit shy, or what we would call predominantly blue-green or green-blue, and likes time to think about things, and you've got quite a dominant surgeon, the chances of that nurse actually saying anything are quite slight, until we introduce a process called personal intervention, which I'll talk about in a while.
Shall I tell you why it's difficult for me to stop the job when I first got into health and safety?
Sure.
Because someone might not like me.
Yeah.
And that's a big one for Yellow Blues. It's a big thing, we want people to like us, and it was just a real, for me, again, it was another game changer because I got into safety. I'd gone from being a DJ where everybody loved me. Yeah, well, most people loved me. I might get your drunk person say I was rubbish, but bottom line, most people enjoyed what I was doing, when I was DJing. So everyone loved me. The club would be jumping up and down. And then I made this huge shift, which is In Life Remixed, where I basically became like health and safety manager at the Olympic Stadium, at Heathrow Airport, large construction companies. But I had to go through that process of understanding that not everyone had to like me. And so just by doing the e-colors, understanding for me that it was difficult for me to stop the job because of this reason, that was something that then I could then work on. And I know you call them potential limiters. And it's that one of my limiters was, well, I have to deal with that because if I'm going to do this job and if I can stop someone getting really hurt, then, it doesn't matter whether they like me or not, because ultimately I can help them. So, yeah, sorry, carry on. So obviously healthcare, you've got sports, there's a number of things you're in at the moment. And that whole thing about stopping the job is it takes a brave person to do that. And I think it's important that everyone understands that their e-colors, because we've all got a percentage of everything, haven't we? Right. And I think it's important for people to understand their e-colors because then they can communicate better, but they can also hear other people better. I mean, that's part of the mission, right?
Very much so. So if you think about it is, well, again, understanding that there's 4 basic personalities, the red in our world represents what we call the doer. That's going to be the action-oriented person. Mm-hmm. Green in people tends to be the analytical thinker, likes lots of data. The yellow tends to be the engager or the influencer, like yourself. And the blue tends to be the relator and the supporter. The red, green, green, red tend to be highly independent and somewhat task-oriented, less emotional, where people who are predominantly yellow, blue, blue, yellow tend to be more people-oriented and more emotional. So, for example, Mark, what you were talking about, there are red, green, green, reds that couldn't care less if people like them or not. It's not something they worry about. But for yourself, and by the way, if you were blue, yellow, it's more about the worry about confrontation because they just do not like confrontation. It is interesting because if somebody's predominantly red, yellow, yellow, red, they tend to be very fast-paced and action-oriented, where people who are more predominantly green, blue, blue, green tend to be information-oriented and more steady-paced. So if you think about that in trying to get a team to work together, for example, then if people don't understand those different tendencies, it just isn't going to go well. And so bringing on that all together has made a big difference. I just want to go back to stopping the job for a minute, because one of the beauties within Equilibria, what we've been able to do over the years is when people were doing what we call the free PDI, so no charge for actually finding out what their e-colors were, we just asked questions. And we would typically get 400 to 500 people a day finding out their e-colors somewhere in the world. So we could get a lot of data very quickly. When we asked what makes it difficult to stop the job, interesting enough, everybody has different reasons why they don't want to do it. So for red greens, it's because they don't like to stop the progress of whatever task is going on. For the top colored greens, it's because they may not have enough information or a better way to do it. The yellows typically will tell you, yellow reds in particular will tell you, no problem if I see it. But they're stopping the people, whereas the red, green, green, reds tend to be stopping the task. And blues, actually, top color blues don't like to do it for what I said before, because they don't like confrontation. Mm. So let me fast forward for a minute. So a few years after we got Equilibria going, we actually started in education. Mm. And actually, we've actually just amalgamated it now, but we did actually have a non-profit called E-Colors in Education. So we had the privilege of working in schools all over the world from kids that are around 7 years old. So at 7, they would find out their e-colors. And at 9, we would introduce this, which is what we call personal intervention. So I'm predominantly yellow-red. So I have a pause button and a play button here. What I watch in schools many, many times is blue-greens who've never, ever raised their hand in class will sit there, press the play button, and raise their hand. That's the power of this. And so I want to talk, I know we're going to talk a little bit about addiction, but there's a big, big part of that comes into play here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. something you did that's quite impressive as well was we were going to go back to Deepwater Horizon in a minute, of course, and I know you said it was okay to talk about that film and stuff, but the Houston Super Bowl, you did the Super Bowl. You trained all the volunteers for the Super Bowl 2 years ago.
3 years ago now. Incredible experience. We got involved about 3 years before. I had no idea the amount of effort that goes into a city preparing for the Super Bowl. So unlike, for example, Wembley, where everybody goes to Wembley, what they do for the Super Bowl is they take it to different stadiums around the country. And so again, through Chevron, actually, and I give them full recognition for it, they asked me if I would go and meet the CEO of the Super Bowl host committee. So I actually meant to meet this lady for dinner, Sally Sargent, a wonderful human being. We were sitting in an Indian restaurant, and I said, Sally, first of all, you need to explain to me what the host committee is. I mean, I've got absolutely no idea, so start from scratch. So she starts to explain to me the role that they play in helping the city raise an enormous amount of money. That a lot of it goes to charity, actually, during this process. And I said, so why do you want to be the CEO of the host committee? She said, well, I want to leave a legacy. I've been helping cities around the country for years get the right to host a Super Bowl, but I've never actually been the one in charge of a host committee. I said, well, I also want to leave a legacy. I'd like to get some of the funding that you're going to get so we can put it into education. I said, but I'll only do it on 2 conditions. She said, what are the conditions? I said, I don't want any tickets to the game, and I don't want paid. And she just burst into tears because, as you can well imagine, in that position, the only people, well, a lot of people obviously taught her to try and get tickets one way or another. Cool. So we started working with her. And again, Mark, a lot of the things that we've talked about is when you are doing things for the right reasons, how things come together. We actually had one of our coaches, Chamika Scott, who used to be a WBNA player. So she was a women's professional basketball player, was working as a coach with us on one of the rigs and found out she had colon cancer. So we were able to embed her into the Houston Super Bowl committee's office. She worked with them right up to the Super Bowl, and a couple of days later, and almost immediately passed away actually after that. But that year really made a huge difference to her and everybody else who was involved. Anyhow, as we got closer to the Super Bowl, we started to look at what could we do in terms of the uniforms, because like the Banco Bilbao, they were paying for the uniforms, people sponsoring this, sponsoring that. So we actually made about 27,000 wristbands, particularly the Houston Super Bowl host committee with the pause and play button on, and got the chance to train all of the actual volunteers. If you look at the training center, which is where the Houston Rockets play in Houston, we actually started right there. Phenomenal experience.
So they all did the PDI then?
They all did the PDI. In fact, the day they announced what we were going to be doing with them, there were literally people sitting in the stadium doing the recolors as they were finding out of it. In the end, I think there were about 10,000 volunteers, but fantastic experience for which many great things have come. And I need to recognize Ben McMahon. He had a huge part to play in all of that.
Good on Ben. Yeah, I've met Ben. As you were kind enough to introduce me to Ben at Chevron. He's a top fellow. So yeah, I mean, look, it's a wonderful story. I mean, I just love everything that we're talking about. I mean, the time's flying, but you and I can go. You and I both as top colour yellows. We're the socialisers, so we can talk for ages, can't we? But one of the things I want to talk about, obviously, Deepwater Horizon. Now that's a film that my wife and I have watched many times. I think, I've always been fascinated. I've never worked offshore, but I was always fascinated, particularly about the helicopter there and back and working in that, tough environment and everything else. And clearly that was, that film, along with the documentary that I've seen on Piper Alpha as well, by the way, which was probably 30 odd years ago now in the North Sea. Those were two things that have really affected my not affected my life, but certainly made me interested in health and safety, particularly offshore. Now, first and foremost, I mean, you know Mr. Jimmy, right? I mean, you know the guy that played, oh, not the player, you know the real Mr. Jimmy from the Deepwater Horizon. And you told me earlier that you went to see the film.
Well, I'll actually back up a little bit. Something we didn't mention. I was on a rig 6 miles away the night the Piper Alpha blew up.
Wow.
And we sent our boats over because every rig in the North Sea has a standby boat in case anything goes wrong. So we were actually sending people a boat over to go and pick up the people out of the water. Laura and I were actually running a session many, many years ago for Chevron, actually, with one of their drilling contractors in the North Sea. And one of the exercises we did at the beginning with people sitting in table groups is tell us something about yourself you'd never know unless we told you. And this gentleman, Steve Ray, who's now a big figure in safety in the North Sea, he said, I'll tell you something. I jumped off the Piper Alpha. I was on that. And wow. I said to him, and you know, people talk about if you've got a life jacket on, if you jump anything higher than about 12 feet, you're going to break your neck. And he jumped way, way, way higher than that.
Well, and if I interrupt you, Lewis, just ever so slightly, there's a on the documentary of Piper Alpha, I'll never forget this. There was a guy, when it was all on fire, one of the guys said he was on the heli deck. He's on the helicopter deck, and he literally looked over the side and was like, well, you know, my feet are burning. And he said, but I'll never forget this. He said the moment he jumped, he just went, what have I done? And then obviously, you know, and I remember watching that documentary, and then I watched Deepwater Horizon, the film, and there's a guy doing exactly the same.
Yeah.
I mean, dramatic. I mean, you know, shocking.
It is around. So Piper Alpha, I tell you, it changed the industry a lot in terms of it's when safety management systems came into place and a lot of other things. The Horizon. So I used to work for Transocean, which is the company that owned the Deepwater Horizon. I'd actually done a lot of the team building sessions on there when the rig first came over from Korea. One of the guys who got killed, I knew very well. He actually used to work with me when I was the HSE manager. And I tell you what hit me. I mean, you can imagine the emotion. I actually went to watch the film with Rob Fisher, who's our partner in the error reduction side of our business, which you know. And Rob and I were sitting there, and I don't mind telling you, I cried my eyes out. And I remember the first time I cried, it's because the actors who played the people who got killed were spitting images of the actual real people. So I will tell you, Dewey Rivette, who's the guy that I knew very well, who was the driller, who was predominantly red-blue and was a procedure follower to the letter. And I've still got that in my head of why they didn't do some of the things they could have done. Well, we'll talk about that in a minute. There's a good reason. But at the end of the day, when I saw the actor who was playing him, it just caught me cold. And I just remember Rob said, what's wrong? I said, it's him. It's actually him. And then, of course, the film played out, and it was absolutely horrendous for lots and lots of reasons, as you can well imagine.
Well, the point is that I have watched that film many times, and it took one of your colleagues, I was chatting with the other day, Ian Collins. It took Ian to tell me that they've actually got the yellow, the colour stickers on some of their safety, their hard hats, actually on the rig in the film. So I've now got the DVD, and I shall be watching that again this Christmas, looking for that. Yeah. But I mean, I hope you don't mind me saying. Obviously, you told me earlier that you hadn't really been involved for some time there. But there's so much about that film about personalities. Now, we're not going to talk about companies or anything like that, but just personalities about how I can get hurt or why I don't want to stop the job. I know it's Hollywood. And I know it's not all like based on absolute fact, but just the personality, the psychology, the play out of what actually was going on that day. I mean, Mr. Jimmy getting his safety award, followed by that horrific. I understand that was true, and that actually happening on the night of the accident itself. I mean, what other things would you like to say about that, just to sort of give us an overview?
Well, if anybody's been following my posts recently, I've been kind of telling the story, because what happened was a couple of weeks ago, somebody sent me a picture of the logo that people have on the coveralls with Transocean, which is Start to Be Accountable, which is something that we started many years ago. And when we were first introducing the idea of personality, what the actual sticker says on Mark Wahlberg's helmet is "Start to Understand Me," with a red spot and a green spot. And that was kind of the very early days of what we were trying to get across to people. But we had a lot of success with it, but nowhere near where I thought it could go. But I will tell you that what I have told people, and we do a lot of coaching in oil and gas today, I tell every leader, if you've got people in the position that John Malkovich played, they need to see this film. Because I don't know all of the details, but the reality is, the golden rule of business is he who has the gold rules. And in that world, the oil companies have the gold, and the contractors are the ones who, do what they're told, basically. I mean, that's top and bottom of it. And so you got Malkovich playing somebody who had very clear ideas about what was going on, and you saw the result.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, and it's a tough watch, of course, and particularly for yourself and anyone else who was affected by it, and people that know people that were there. So yeah, I mean, thank you for sharing that. I mean, that is important, and I think that there's always lessons to be learned, isn't there, from any accident, any incident, or indeed any serious, incident in your own life. We're talking earlier about, you having your collapse, me having my collapse. There's lessons to be learned, isn't there? And you just got to make sure you're listening.
Absolutely. And so I think, actually after you, Mark and I, we talked, didn't we, a few weeks ago, and I actually posted on every channel that I could, does it take, a real massive something happening in your life before you decide to do something different? Because it's a pity if it does, put it that way. I do believe that when I talk to most people who've either been through, it could be a horrendous car accident. I mean, there's lots of different ways that people get a wake-up call, but they typically will do something different and become a lot more determined to do that than they ever were before. And Mark, I don't know if we're going to talk about it, but I really do want to mention it, because I think one of the things that jumps out at me is when we introduce personal intervention, when we introduce these wristbands, we really did not know what we were onto. Today, I will tell you that you can learn about e-colors, you can be as self-aware as you like, but it's only when you put it into action is anything actually going to change. And this little wristband really kind of sets it off. When we got into education, unbeknown to me, one of the school systems we were working with actually had the educational contract for about 9 residential treatment centers around Houston. And I honestly didn't even know what a residential treatment center was. But I went to run a session one day, and instead of the 20-odd teachers I thought were going to be there were probably about 150 teachers. So I asked the lady who was running, I said, who are all these people? Oh, they're all from the residential treatment center. I said, well, what's a residential treatment center? She said, oh, this is where the recovering alcoholics and drug addicts between the ages of 11 and 16 go. And I'm going, what? She said, yeah, and we've taken your e-colors into every one of them. Are you okay with that? I go, yeah, I'm fine with it, but it would, how is it working? She said, well, are you prepared to come into a residential treatment center and meet some of the kids? Because every one of them was in there through the judicial system at some point or another.
Yeah. So
for anybody who is listening to this and is a parent, I will give you 2 things that jumped out at me. Number one, in my stupidity, I expected most of these kids to be come from down and out families. Very wrong. The first person I talked to in there, her mum was number 2 at Memorial Hermann Brain Cancer Research Center. And I asked her, and many, 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 many other ones after, I said, how did you get into this? Well, I can't live up to the expectations of my parents. Really? Well, what are the expectations of your parents? I don't know. I just know I can't live up to them. I heard that over and over and over again.
Wow.
After we had started to meet some of these kids, again, I happened to be with Laura. We were sitting in a session not many weeks after, and 3 girls, everybody got out for pizza halfway through the call or through the course. And these 3 girls said, Lewis, Laura, we'd like to talk to you for a minute. I said, yeah, what do you want? Oh, we just wanted to let you know we were going to commit suicide last Saturday, and decided to press our pause buttons. And I don't mind telling you, I know you and I have talked about this, so I really hope people are listening to this, because I don't mind telling you, it just blew mine and Laura's mind. But I began to start to understand a little bit about how all of this works. And it's really around self-awareness, and then having a tool which gives you that bridge to be able to do something about it. So I really appreciate how your story around addiction, you know, we talked about it even before the show, but it's something I'd really encourage people to be thinking about, is that, of course, when people are in some kind of rehabilitation center, they may not be getting much education, but they're getting lots of self-awareness, lots of it.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, my own addictions were a huge problem in my early life. They just got out of hand. You know, they were fun for a while, and then they just got out of hand, and I, you know, had my own collapse. I would say that my addictions were part of the problem. I would say that stress and the stress I put myself under really were huge for me there. But yeah, you very kindly said that obviously you'll make some introductions for Life Remixed as well in those kind of centres, and I'd love to be able to help, you know, younger people with addiction problems go through, you know, e-colors and obviously, you know, self-awareness and coaching and help change some of their outcomes, because ultimately, you know, I do believe that if I'd have got this information earlier, perhaps I would have changed quicker. Would I have been ready? I'm not sure. Would I have been listening? I'm not sure. It took me laying on the floor, not knowing what was going on, for me to start to wise up. It's a fascinating question about, you know, does it take that? Because many people just sort of go through life, and some people, I've heard it before, some people are creeping through life to make it safely to death without taking any risks. And actually, you know, you've got to take some risks in life, but it's about managing those risks. And of course, that's, you know, what we do for work with health and safety and e-colors, etc. as well. It's about managing and understanding the risk, isn't it? So, but a quick testimony for you as well for e-colors, just for everyone watching. The e-colors system, I did it myself and learned about myself, and I used that to go from basically, you know, out of work DJ, understanding more about myself, and got myself up to the board of directors of two very senior UK companies. I used that by learning about my potential limiters and working on those and getting myself up to a point where I could actually be in a really, really positive place. And the e-colors and the Equilibria system is fabulous for that. So I urge you to go onto their website and do the, you know, discover your e-colors. The other thing I would say as a testimony as well is that I got my wife to do it. She wasn't my wife, but I got her to do it because I always found her quite slow and a bit ponderous when we got together. I was like, why is she not more sort of like vibrant and kind of like, you know, like I am, and I'm a yellow. So, you know, and I got her to do it, and she came out as a green blue. Now my strategy and green thinking is very, very small. And then Emma did it, and her green came out as absolutely massive. And actually what that does is, for the two of us, it helps us understand each other. So she knows I'm a big socializer, people, I'm all about the who. She's green, logical strategy. She's all about the how. But between the two of us, I know it sounds a bit cheesy, but we actually complete each other in that kind of like that circle, if you like, of percentages, because she's very strong in the areas that I'm not so strong, and vice versa. So, and the last thing, I also got my mum and brother to do it as well, and we even got closer together as well because I could understand them better. So it works in families just as much as it works in the corporate world, in sport, education, or, you know, addiction centers. I mean, e-colors can work anywhere.
So I got to tell you, it's the last few years have been phenomenal in terms of the people that again, if I was to sit here and thank all the people, and before I forget talking about that, Mark, I do want to mention, I was lucky enough to listen to your discussion the other day about gratitude, which is something that I am continually doing. If there's anybody listening to this and they know me, they know I'm continually thanking them. Because I think it's just the most phenomenal thing to be able to let people know. And I never want to kind of leave it too late, for want of a better way of putting it, because you never know what's around the corner. Our good friend Garrett Jones, who I've introduced you to, and I'm sure will help, you know, he'll bring part of the NFL to you. He always says, you're not even promised the next minute. And that's reality. So having said that, I think the idea of, we've been really, really blessed over the last few years in people who have supported us in many, many ways. They will see what we do. I will tell you that every coach who ever joined us, most of them saw our people working somewhere and went, I have to do that. I have to be part of that process. And people who just have seen what we do along the way, many to name today, is what taken us into other areas. So we got into sport in a big way, thanks to Cammy Craig, actually, first with Ben McMahon, and then with Cammy Craig, who happened to be, she played water polo for the US Olympic team, got 2 golds and a silver. She introduced us to Lynn Kaczmarek, where we've taken off with sport. She introduced us to Jeff Feltzer, who you've already spoken to. He's taking us into healthcare in a way that we had never dreamed of. And the story just goes on. And I just want to let people know, and I wanted to have this opportunity. I was telling you before, I'm going to be 70 next year, and next year is going to be the hardest I'm ever going to work to make sure more people know about this. So any way that you can help us to spread the word, I'm all in.
Well, easy work when you enjoy it, number one, Lewis. And the second point, of course, I remember saying to you a few months ago, I said, look, I'm going to mention Equilibria in the book. And is that okay? Because there's stuff in here about addiction and everything else that I got up to when I was younger. Is that all right? And you basically just said to me, like, Mark, so, of course it's all right. I want you to tell the story. I want you to tell the truth, because the way you've bounced back and the way you've become the man you are today is something that, I'm very proud or pleased to have associated with Equilibria. And I was really grateful for that comment again. I'm massively grateful to you for everything you've done, certainly, and influencing me over the last 10 years. I mean, one of the things you do is you keep people safe, obviously. You've got a huge passion for people, which I love. You bring a lot of joy to people. And one of the things I would say about just this interview and everything else we talk about is that man becomes what he thinks about. And when I say man, I mean people. People become what they think about. And we have to acknowledge the fact that perhaps when we were younger, we weren't doing things necessarily brilliantly. And then we had to make that change. It's almost like nature's handbrake, like, right, stop, try a different way. Bob Proctor said to me, your way isn't working, try mine. And I was like, yeah, okay. So, I think it's really important to appreciate that. And obviously, I'm over the moon that you've agreed to write part of the foreword to Life Remixed. Really, really grateful to that, to you for that. I'm looking forward to sending you a copy to read, of course. But just having your accreditation to it, your testimonial to it, and your understanding of my journey for the last 10 years, as you've watched from afar, really. We've met a few times, we've bumped into each other at Heathrow and sat down, had lunches and stuff like that. But that kind of journey of intertwined, but watching each other. And you mentioned earlier that you've seen me, obviously, with the knee operations and stuff like that. I mean, I appreciate all your support.
Well, it's an absolute privilege. And again, I know Linda just made a comment before. So for those of you in Leeds, I apologize. There's a lot to apologize for, which is another story altogether. But it has given me the opportunity to really take another view of life. And frankly, there's a few things you'd asked me the other day about what are some things that I'm absolutely clear on. And I think that might be worth passing on, especially with COVID, Mark, and everything else that's going on. So when people say to me, what's the best advice that you can give somebody so they can remix their lives? There's a few things that I'd just like to share. And again, it's up to anybody if they decide to take them on. But number one is to be intentional and be absolutely intentional with everything you do. That is absolutely clear to me. Number two, and I actually saw this in a film many, many years ago where the message came home to me clearly. There could be people from a myriad of religions watching this right now, or will watch it when you put it out. I heard somewhere in this film somebody explaining to somebody that just imagine that when you are born with X amount of heartbeats. So you receive your allotted amount of heartbeats. And like it or not, once that last heartbeat is there, that's it. I will tell you, and for those of you in Leeds can vouch for it, I wasted a lot of heartbeats when I was in my late teens and 20s.
Me too, Lewis, me too.
And actually, I wasted a lot of heartbeats, Mark, when I was in the safety world, trying to help people who didn't want my help. A lot of them. But since I made my mind up after Poe, I will tell you I've not wasted one heartbeat. And I can go to the grave with that. So when I do die, I will die with a smile on my face. And if it happens immediately after this program, my wife won't be very happy and a few other people, but at least I will go knowing I've done what I could.
Do you know what, Lewis? That's important, because I just jump in there. Making that peace with that, outcome, which is going to happen to all of us eventually. But making that peace, actually, it means that there's a great line in the Shawshank Redemption: "Get busy living or get busy dying." And I know that wasting the heartbeats is basically, a negative way, if you like, of living. And actually, when you make your peace with the fact that you've only got one life and you need to go for it and make it good, then you really get busy living, don't you? And I think that's a beautiful thing, and that's what you're doing. So please continue.
No, absolutely. So I then have to start analyzing the green in me. How do you do that? And again, I get people challenging me all the time, but I do not allow myself to get frustrated, disappointed, angry. Any of those emotions don't come in. Now, they used to, again, in the days, for example, there's a piece in the book when I was with Laura one day in Las Palmas running a session where she was getting very upset because somebody wasn't taking on board what we were talking about from a safety perspective. And she came over to me and said, I know that our vision is realizing potential, but that guy has got no potential to realize. And I said, Laura, maybe it's just not his moment today, But by that time, I'd made my mind up. Things like that were not going to bother me. And so think about everything that's gone on in the last year, and in our business, which a lot of it was oil and gas. We had the oil price drop at the back end of 2019. Then we had COVID. We have lost numerous coaches, as you can well imagine. We've had to completely rework our business model. But anybody will tell you that we've got an AGM shareholder meeting tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. They're not going to hear any frustration from me because it doesn't do any good. Right. And so I think if I'm not going to allow myself to lose any heartbeat, I have to keep all of that in mind. And I got one more thing I want to just say.
Yeah, go for it.
Mark, let me ask you a question. Who's the most important person in your life?
That's a great question. In all honesty, I wouldn't have answered like this probably 20 years ago. But the most important person to keep happy, healthy, and wealthy is me.
Exactly. And I have this discussion a lot with people. So when we started Equilibria, in our first meeting, which was just around the corner here in Spain, actually, for where I am right now, of all the people that were there, I think all 8 of us at the time, they said, so how are we going to run the business? And we said, this is what we're going to do. Number one, you look after yourself. Because if you can't look after yourself, how are you going to look after anybody else? Number two, you look after your family. Number three, in our world, we used to send 2 coaches out at a time. So we'd say, look after each other. And number 4, look after the client. And if you do all of that in that order, the business will look after itself. And a lot of people don't think like that, but I find now as we pass that on to other leaders, everybody seems to be grasping the concept. And the last thing I want to say, Mark, before I forget, and I give you full credit for this because I love the way that you talk about having several different revenue streams. Have a plan B and a plan C and a plan D. But you can't have all your eggs in one basket, that's for sure.
No way. You've got to have multiple sources of income to ride out any crisis. It's something that I've learned from Bob Proctor. It's something that Kevin Green has taught me strategies of. Massively grateful to both of those guys. It is about making sure that you are recession proof. And I remember working at Heathrow and thinking this place is recession proof, and how wrong I was, because look at it at the moment, it's decimated, So, but you and I obviously I've done a lot of leadership qualifications in the last 10 years. Our lives have intertwined over a period of time. There's so much that we can continue to talk about, but I think I've got one quote for you that I just want to read to you, because I think, I think it ties in with everything that is Life Remixed is about, and also about at the end of the day. See what you think. If there's one secret in leading yourself and other people, it is to generate an atmosphere in which others feel at ease and appreciated.
And I would fully endorse that. And you know, it's interesting. I was actually coaching an Indian gentleman the other day, very high up in one of the organizations I work with. And he actually said to me is, how come we've only been working together for a while, but I feel like I've known you my entire life? I said, because the only thing I've thought about since we started this conversation is you. and I tell you, that's not how I used to operate. I used to have 8 million things going through my head. But again, since I became intentional, actually, and that's another thing. And again, I don't know why this happened. I used to sleep about 3 hours a night, back before 2002. And I'd be up, I'd be thinking about this, an idea. After I came out of the 10 days thinking about things, my wife bought me 2 down pillows, which I take everywhere. Everybody laughs at me, but I take them everywhere in the world with me, including on the plane. And I get 7 hours sleep a night, solid, wherever I am. And I think about one thing at a time. So Mark, I want to tell you, thank you, because you've given me an opportunity to share some stuff today that I've been wanting to do for a while. And I'm telling you, we're taking it up to the next level next year. And I appreciate it.
I think in 2021, I mean, I think right now we're just warming up. I heard 2020 described as a year to be grateful for what you've got. And just be grateful that, you know, you've got food, clothing and shelter, you've got basic human needs, you've got your health, you know, just be grateful for these things, you know, be grateful for the fact that the economy is still turning to some degree. Just be grateful for that. And in 2021 and 22, we can get back to our hopes, our ambitions, our dreams, and our larger purpose, vision and goals. And I can see Life Remixed and E-Colours and Equilibria working together more and more over the coming years, which I'll be honest with you, I've always dreamt of working with you. From the moment I read your ethics document, which said exactly what you just said about it, about look after yourself and then look after your family. And I read that and I was like, me and this guy are like simpatico. Just, you know, it's not a surprise to me. Man becomes what he thinks about. It's not a surprise to me that I'm sitting here talking with you tonight and that we're becoming friends as well as business partners and you know, and supporting one another in our mission and our journey. So, you know, I absolutely love that, Lewis. I mean, like I said, I could talk for hours with you, but I think we at some point we have to stop. But tell me a bit more about where people can find you, where they can connect with Equilibria and E-Colours.
Yeah, so I actually got there's a few different ways. First of all, I am very happy if people just want to email me. So that is lewis.senior@equilibria.com. If you use the hashtag intentional CEO on Facebook or LinkedIn, that'll work. And then there is Equilibria. There is info@equilibria.com. There is Facebook. There's a lot here that we'll send out. I'll send to everybody. But the first one is just look me up either on Facebook, LinkedIn, or just drop me an email or call me. Most people who are on this call who know me have already got my number. But I really hope, Mark, that we can impact a heck of a lot more people in your part of the world, because I think there's a lot to be gained from what we're doing together.
I agree. I mean, like I said to you again, I'm just going to say it one more time. You write in your book all those years ago, like nearly 20 years ago, but you write in your book, and then me reading it about 10 years ago, I'm reading this story about this guy who's had this like huge collapse because he's overworked and overstressed, and it's just life's got very, very difficult. And just reading your book, I was like, I need to talk to this guy. I need to find a way to connect with him. I need to speak to him. And you're very generous there by giving your emails and stuff like that. I love that. You know, I remember reaching out to you, and I just remember our conversation just developing over a period of time. And here we are 8 years later, 7, 8 years later. And you know, we're working together. You're writing a forward to Life Remixed itself, which, yes, massively grateful for, mate. Massively grateful.
And I actually got into trouble yesterday because at the end of a big session we were running in the States, I went, "Happy Christmas," and Laura goes, "You can't say that anymore." So it's an interesting world that we live in, I can tell you.
You can just say it to me, Lewis. I'm fine with it. I don't overthink too many things, as you know. I'm not a green. I'm not a logical thinker very much. I'm all about the who. I'm all about people. You know, and I'm quite.
Whatever you believe in may work for you. And I will tell you this: for a lot of the people that we're working with, they are ready for a break, and I'm sure it's the same for a lot of people who are on this course. So do make the most of the holiday period coming up. And again, look forward to seeing everybody next year who we get to know. Mark, thank you for having me. It's much appreciated.
Lewis, listen, it's been amazing. Like I said, you're a fascinating guy. I can't wait to read your Forward to Life remixed. I'm sure lots of other people will want to read that as well. Listen, I've got nothing but love and respect for you, mate. So thank you very much. And Emma just says, Happy Christmas to you, Lewis.
Thank you.
Listen, mate, thanks so much. Thank you.
My pleasure. All the best.